Hi everyone, you are listening to She Leads with Carly. Our guest today is Yvonne Wassenaar, the CEO of Puppet, an infrastructure automation platform for large enterprises. As a successful leader with years of experience, Yvonne shares the importance of networking, dealing with unconscious bias in the workplace, and strategically managing your own career opportunities. One key takeaway: it is up to us to navigate our careers. Advocate for yourself. Be upfront about where you want to go and be upfront about what you think it's going to take, and then validate it with your progress. So many lessons from Yvonne. I love this chat and I hope you do too. Hello, Yvonne. Thank you so much for coming on to She Leads. I'm so excited to get to know you and I'm so honored to have you on the show. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited about the series that you're doing and thrilled that you asked me.
Of course. So you are the CEO of Puppet, which is an infrastructure automation platform for large enterprises. And I'm excited to, have you share more about Puppet. But even prior to Puppet, you are not shy from holding, these senior C-level executive roles at, Airware. You were the CEO and CIO, the Chief Information Officer at New Relic, and really just multiple leadership roles at VMware. You were a partner at Accenture for 20 years, which we'll get into because already that's a feature in itself to stay at a company for long, especially nowadays. So before we even get into all of that and your role as a CEO, take me back to, graduating from UCLA with a degree in economics. At this moment in your life, 22, where did you see your future? What questions were you asking yourself to almost navigate your career?
Yeah, it's always interesting, I think, to look back and start to where your mind was when you're at that pivotal point. Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of people look at where I've gotten to and they think it must have been a very straight and well-planned line. Yeah. And it was anything but that. For me, my parents immigrated from Holland. I grew up lower middle class. My dad was a college professor. My mom didn't work for a while, and worked at Kmart, and ultimately went into real estate and did these other jobs. And so, for me, I always knew I'd go to college. But my big aspiration when I started at UCLA was to be a business economist, make over $100,000 a year. That was my kind of financial milestone. And what was interesting is it was actually one of my professors that tapped into, this interest around computer science and computer programming. And so when I went to college, it was in the dark ages in the 80s. You coded in language like assembler and Pascal and Fortran. But my calculus teacher asked me to take his programming class. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know what it was, but I fell in love with it because I loved both the science and the art of computer programming. And so when I graduated, I went to Accenture because it seemed like a company that was, big and established. And back in that era, you were looking for companies that would invest in your growth. And I knew I really enjoyed software engineering and all of that. And so I didn't think much beyond that move. It was really taking a step into an organization that I thought could help grow and cultivate who I was as an individual, and to get to do something that I loved.
Yeah. And even now there's a gap between, females and males entering those STEM fields, those engineering fields. So imagine back then, was that something that you considered being like, okay, can I be passionate about it or can I jump into it? Or was there some hesitation because you were a female?
For me personally, I think everybody's different. I was actually much more comfortable around men than women. Yeah. For a whole host of reasons. I think I didn't really like to shop. I didn't really like chocolate that much. I did like a lot of the stereotypical things that you say, oh, women love to do this. Yeah. And so even though I was in a sorority, I always hung out at fraternity houses. Like I felt more comfortable, I think, in that type of environment. So what was interesting to me from a gender perspective is I never really made note that I was one of the few women until I was much more senior in my career. It started to be called out more. And I noticed what was happening in the environments around me. But I would say for the first 10 years of my career, I never even really paid attention to it, which is interesting in hindsight, because I do think that there was unconscious bias in the system. And I do think with what I know now, perhaps I would have navigated those years differently. Clearly, I've done fine. But it is one of those things where I didn't have a very high sensitivity to it at the time.
Yeah, very interesting. So we'll get into almost when that shift happens and you started to recognize it. But tell me now, you're at Accenture, and like I said, you spent 20 years at Accenture, which is amazing for, it's a feat in itself. And one thing that you mentioned that you value is growth and personal growth. So tell me, how did you know that you were still having that personal growth, and why didn't you leave sooner? Tell me, that 20-year experience at Accenture.
Yeah. So in fairness, I left and went back a couple times in that tenure. So I left, did my own consulting for a while, went to business school, went from being a software engineer to being a strategy consultant. So even though it was still Accenture, it was a very, very different type of work. And when I was in the strategy practice, I left during the dot-com boom for a 6-month period to go work at a startup, which was really a lifestyle change because my fiance had moved out from Maine and I was looking to not travel so much and things like that. But quickly ended up going back. And I believe really the two things that kept me at Accenture as long as I was there, one was just the nature of the work. Like, I love learning. I love just, I'm very intellectually curious. I love working with clients, looking at different situations. And for me, the beauty of consulting is it was kind of like school. Like you could follow clients you really liked, like you could follow professors, you could, bounce around, you could work in different continents. And so there was a lot of variety you could get in the job without actually having to switch employers. So you could build a network, you could have consistency of benefits and things. And again, my parents immigrated to this country with very little. So that type of stability was super important to me. I wasn't a big financial risk taker because I was just trying to build a level of comfort and stability underneath me. The second thing that kept me is the investment that Accenture made in me. I went through, they have great training early on, but they invested in executive coaches for me. The people I worked with were amazing. I still keep in touch with many of them. And so just the caliber of individuals that I got to work with and the leadership training, the management training. Somebody asked me at one point, they said, "So Yvonne, how did you decide to become a manager?" And I had to think about it. I'm like, I didn't decide. But like I was on the Accenture conveyor belts and it kind of, you go from, being an individual contributor to having a different scope to all of a sudden, like one day, like you just get that manager promotion and that's what you do. And so to me, I never thought about it. It was just like what I did. And I was fortunate that Accenture provides a lot of training and help when you make that transition. Because I would say one of the hardest career transitions to make is from being an individual contributor to managing a team and understanding how to do that effectively. And I was horrible the first time around. The gentleman who I managed, I'm amazed that he even talked to me. I was so horrible in retrospect. But yeah, I think that investment Accenture makes, and this is what I tell people graduating from college now. I've worked in startups for a long time at this point. I think both startups and larger companies can be great for different reasons. And I wouldn't be too quick to put all your eggs just in the startup basket. There's many wonderful things about it. You get to, do a ton of stuff and you can take risk and, it's small and it's fast and it's agile, but there's typically not that resource to invest in some of the more kind of core institutional leadership skills and management skills that if you truly want to get to the executive ranks, even in a startup, are highly valuable. So I feel really lucky. I've gotten to do both. I've gotten to be in really, really big companies and really small ones. And I encourage people that I mentor to really try over the course of your career. To your point, people don't stay anywhere 20 years anymore. So, spend 4 8 years in a big company, spend 4 8 years in a small company if you haven't done it, or maybe a couple, and really get that variety. But the big thing in my book is really work hard to make the investment to stay 3 to 4 years. And I see a lot of people younger in their career switching jobs every 18 months. And the problem with that is to really go through a complete learning cycle, you need about 3 years. because the first year you're kind of figuring out what you're doing, you're putting your plans in place, whatever it is. The second year you're executing on it. The third year you're transitioning it to somebody else and you're going on to the next thing. If you leave after a year and a half because the company's going through a rough patch, you never learn how to manage through a rough patch. Right. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of skills that you get by having some resilience and endurance. And I think that's the one thing I worry about with some of the fluidity of younger employees, is that they're not getting some of those core skills that those of us who grew up in a time where you didn't change jobs, every 18 to, 24 months, we just got because you were there. That's just what you did.
Right. So so many lessons from that. And so that alone, I think it's so valuable. But one thing I'm wondering is, really, you mentioned how at Accenture you're on this conveyor belt. So how does anyone really, how often should you tap into your own personal growth to make sure you're not really, going around that conveyor belt, or whether you're going up or whatever? How do you make sure that you're still tapping into, what you need for your professional growth before making a decision? Does that make sense? I worded it a bit weirdly, but.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things. I think there are environmental things that are really important, and I think there are decision criteria that are really important. Yeah. On the environmental side, the way that I think it is, there's an internal driver that we all have. For some of us, it may be reaching a certain place and kind of just hanging there. But for many of us, we have, stronger ambitions that are pushing us along. Mm-hmm. And that can be what I would term kind of fear driven. You're doing those things because you're running away from something, or they can be opportunistic driven. Like you see something and you must have it. You dream big and you want to conquer that dream. I would say for me, I was running away from things. Like, I was a fear driven person from an ambition standpoint, in the sense that I wanted to achieve more because I wanted to be financially independent. Like, I wanted to have these things that I didn't necessarily see in my childhood. I switched later on in my career to be much more dream big and go after the dreams. But kind of grounding yourself in what your internal drivers are is important. Equally important is grounding yourself in what are the external drivers. What's going to push or pull you in the right direction? So just like I mentioned, it was my calculus teacher that really kind of pulled me into computer science. I was really fortunate that I had a network of people around me who saw things in me that I may not have seen in myself, who either pushed me or pulled me to the next level of what was possible. And, I would seek those people out. And to me, later in my career, it was an executive coach who asked me, she was helping me, advance my career within Accenture. And she said, well, do you want to be a consultant forever? And I was like, oh God, no. And she's like, I hate to break it to you, but you're over 40 and that's all you've ever done. I was like, okay, well, I never thought about that, but okay. And it was one of those things where she really pushed me to look at something different. If that, but I hadn't thought about it, because I enjoyed my work. I made good money. At that point, I was a single mom with a couple kids. Like, I just, it felt safe, which was a really important value to me. And she's like, well, why do you think something else wouldn't be safe? And so I do think you need people, whether it's family members, friends, colleagues, old bosses, new bosses, to push and or pull you into new opportunities. Yeah. The way that I think about the opportunities, the decision criteria, I like to talk about, you have a portfolio of opportunities based on where you're at. And every career decision you make is going to either reinforce that opportunity patch or shift it. And so for me, within Accenture, if I didn't leave, my opportunity path was getting narrower and narrower because, I'm at Accenture 20 years, I'm at Accenture 30 years. You've been at Accenture 30 years. What are you going to go do? That's all you know how to do. And so for me, when I made the move from Accenture to VMware, what I did is I fundamentally shifted that opportunity patch. All of a sudden, I went from just being able to be a consultant to being able to be a consultant and an operator. Mm-hmm. And when I went from VMware to New Relic, I shifted it again. I went from just being, quote unquote, a big company person to being somebody who could work in big companies and smaller companies. And so, to me, what I always tell people is look at what you're doing. If you leave, one company to go to another company and do the exact same job just because they're going to pay you more, what is that really doing to your opportunity patch? It's making you a deeper expert in what you already do. Yeah. Is that what you want? Maybe you want it because it's a company 4x the size and you're going to learn how to do the same job at a different scale. But maybe you're better off, doing a different job in your same company and expanding your patch. Or, for me, what I talk about a lot is the fastest rise in title is just doing the same thing over and over again and getting better and better and better. Yeah. But that has its limits. For me, if you look at my career trajectory, like I kind of went up, I made partner, and then I did a bunch of horizontal moves. But then all of a sudden, after I'd done all those, I was able to make a huge vertical leap in terms of, being a CEO, being on public boards, because I had amassed so much breadth of experience. Right. That it made it really rich. And so I think both, kind of that decision criteria of what is it really going to do to your next opportunity? This opportunity is going to do what to the future funnel of opportunities you have. Yeah. And then surrounding yourself with people who will pull and push you, and being really clear in your own grounding of, what are you trying to get away from, or what are you trying to go towards, so that you can be honest with yourself, and really get something that resonates with who you are and what you have the potential to be.
Yeah, incredible. So many lessons in this. I'm loving it. So Yvonne, tell me, how was that transition, before we get into leadership and the transition from a, individual contributor to a manager? I'm interested really that transition from leaving Accenture, that comfort zone, being there for a long time, being, surrounded by people, to now going to VMware and really kind of taking on from a consultant to now an operator. How was that transition for you?
Really hard.
Yeah.
Really, really hard. I would say it's as hard as going from an individual contributor to a manager, going from a consultancy type of role to an operating role at kind of the vice president level is really tough. And the reason it's tough, and I've done a lot of analysis on this because I've had a lot of consultants ask me if they should do the same thing. I want to pressure test this. When you work at a consultancy like an Accenture, like I said, you're surrounded by really, really super bright people. To a large extent, it's a very homogeneous group. Like you do a certain type of thing. And so what was interesting to me is one of the first things I had to learn was how to broaden my horizons in growing and cultivating diverse teams. I could do case interviews in my sleep. I knew how to interview for a strategic consultant like nobody's business. But did I know how to hire a great finance person or a great sales ops person or a great sales executive? Those are all very, very different skills, different types of people, different networks to tap into. So one was really on the talent front, being able to figure that out. The second thing is being able to run a day-to-day business versus solving a company's most important problems are very, very different in terms of how you get your work done. When somebody's going to pay Accenture $1 million or more to solve a problem, like everybody's going to show up to the meetings, everybody's going to say it's a priority. The company's already figured out it's a priority. Right. When you're running, a group of 250, 400 people, you've got a couple $100 million in budget, whatever it is, not everything you're doing is important to everybody in the company. Yeah. And so how you get work done, very few things can be done completely within a functional area. And so learning how to, consider absorption capacity, learning how to figure out what has to be done perfectly versus what can just kind of be good enough versus what can maybe not be done. Being able to do that type of triage and prioritization is very, very different than you've got a consulting problem. And of course you have to solve it perfectly. You're paid a lot of money to do that. Yeah. So I'd say that's the second thing. And the third thing is really just around how the economics work. It's not as important when you're more junior in your career, but when you start reaching the executive level, you have to know how the budget cycles work. You have to know how to get money. You have to know how to do a lot of things that, at Accenture just kind of got done for me. Like I delivered my client P&L, but
Right.
it's different than going in and arm wrestling for your part of the fiscal budget and how you do that. So I'd
Yeah.
say those were some of the big shifts. I actually went to my boss, who was the COO, after a year and told him, I said, hey, I know you think I'm doing a great job. I said, I'm killing myself. And so I'd really like an executive coach. And I think that's part of what Accenture taught me is when you get to certain levels of your career, like that's something you should ask for. And I think that's something from the gender perspective, you'll see men asking for a lot more than women.
Right.
And it's something that I really try to drive a step change with. But oftentimes women think like, gosh, I should be able to improve myself. Well, certainly when you're younger in your career, take advantage of, the training that companies offer, take advantage of, seminars and courses and peer groups and do that. But when you get to that senior director level, when you get to that VP level, when you get to the executive level, you need different type of support and advancement. And I have an executive coach now. I'm the CEO of a company, but you that's how you make yourself better, is by getting that outside help and perspective.
Yeah, incredible. So during this time, when you said the transition was far from easy, and you were really like, it seems like learning by doing until you stood up for yourself and asked for an executive coach. During this time, going through those hard times, how did you get through it? Or how did you stay mentally strong and be like, you know what, I'm growing. This is hard, but I'm growing, versus, maybe deciding to go back to Accenture, to somewhere where you excel and you're succeeding.
Yeah, I never thought about going back. That's
Okay.
I guess for me, like I said, I'm very curious and
Yeah.
I like to be intellectually challenged. And so I've never hit a point in my life where I've decided something was too hard, so I wasn't going to go after it. Like
Right.
once I've decided I want to do something, it's just, if this route isn't going to get me there, then what route will? And it usually involves some type of research, and data to help me figure out the problem. And a classic example I'll give you is on the gender front, where I was really starting to be flummoxed when I was at VMware as to why, men would ask 10 times to one what women would, in my organization for things, and
Yeah.
who would be put in what jobs, and why certain things would happen. And I kind of looked around, and even, for myself, at one point I was told, hey, you'd be amazing at this job, but you already work so hard and you have 3 young children. And I was like, well, what does that have to do with anything? And I was struggling with why these people who I knew were really good people and who cared about me and my career were starting to hold me back.
Yeah.
And because it didn't jive. And what was interesting is I actually went to the Clayman Institute at Stanford, and they've done some incredible research, and I got really steeped in the whole study around unconscious bias and how the systems work. And what's interesting is, once you understand the why, it's so much easier to figure out how you navigate it. And so I think that was really empowering for me. But that's just like one example of, when things get really hard, then I start looking for, well, what's the daylight? Like, other people can figure it out. Of course, I can figure it out. I'm not going to, I guess I have that tenacity of just really trying to push through.
Yeah.
But I would say it comes back to what I said, about kind of the people who are going to pull and push you.
Yeah.
You also need those people around you who flatter your ego, who tell you you're great. And that's also what I had. I mean, I had an amazing boss who was like, no, you're amazing. It's like, okay, well, I may be amazing. That's great, but it's too hard.
Right.
So help it be less hard, because other people do it. And I know I'm at least as smart as they are. And I know I work, as many hours, if not more. So I should be able to get it done.
Yeah.
Faster.
So for those people who, were doubting you or saying that you have kids and you need to focus on them, how did you deal with it? Or how did you almost get past it? I mean, I guess you mentioned you having the people who do encourage you, but personally, was it a struggle that you had to really, consciously put aside or prove them wrong?
Yeah, it was different earlier in my career than later. And for me, I think all of us probably had this at some point. By the time I left Accenture, like I said, I mean, I left my house at the age of 16 to go to college, and I thought if I could make $100,000 a year, I'd like hit the jackpot. So I never had really exuberant, dreams about, having multiple millions of dollars. So,
Yeah.
Having been a partner at Accenture for 5 years, I was financially solid enough, and I knew I was quote unquote employable enough that it allowed me to take a lot more risk in how I navigated my own career. So in that example where this individual, kind of made the comment of I had 3 young kids,
Yeah.
I looked at them and I said, well, does anybody else on your staff, would you have said that to any of them? And they said, no, but I care more about you as a mother than I do an employee. And I was like, and I was the only female on the staff. And I just looked at them and I said, you know what? I said, I really appreciate that because I know that comes from the heart. And now I'm here to tell you I'm a grown woman. Right. I'm a damn good mother. And if you don't give me the bigger job, I'm quitting. And I walked off. Yeah. And the only thing that gave me the confidence to do it was they started with, I know you would be amazing at it.
Yeah.
If they hadn't told me that, then I probably wouldn't have been so arrogant. But because I knew the barrier was the fact that I was a mom versus was I competent enough to do it, just was like fire in my belly. And what was interesting, they gave me the job. I did an amazing job. It all worked out great. Yeah. But I would say, what's important is to find that inner truth. And what I tell people is, there's some jerks out there, but in general, I think, I always try to start from a position of trust. So like I said, I know it comes from the heart, right. but let me tell you my reality. Exactly. Yeah. Other people on your team are great dads. They didn't not get the promotion because they're a great dad. So, and oftentimes when you raise it that way, if you raise it in a thoughtful manner, you can make progress both in educating people to some of the unconscious bias that exists in the world around us, as well as advancing yourself and your own ability to drive impacts.
Right. Incredible. And so one big theme is really, advocating for yourself. And it's not easy. It's much easier said than done. Like in the moment, it's hard to, tell your boss that you're going to quit, given what he just said and the fact that you are competent enough to do it, but because he's prioritizing you being a mother. So what advice do you have for, young females entering these new roles or even in senior positions, like to advocate for themselves and to have that confidence to really speak up for themselves?
I think it comes down to a couple of things when you're looking to advance in your career.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that it's really important to have very transparent, early and often conversations around both what you want to do and what it's going to take to get there. And so the first thing I'd say, gender aside, is, don't shy away from those conversations. I remember when I was at VMware, I was going to leave at one point and they talked me into staying. But I was very clear, like I wanted to run something. Mm-hmm. And so when I ultimately did leave VMware to take this, bigger job at New Relic, it wasn't a surprise. I didn't burn any bridges. Like I'd been very clear what I wanted to do. I stayed because they gave me incremental things I could do to build out my portfolio of skills. And then I got to a point when I was ready to leave, and it was I could call Pat Gelsinger today. Like it was on very, very good terms. And so I think some people shy away from it because it's uncomfortable.
Right.
Like I don't, but I talk to people all the time. I talk to my staff. Like I know who on my staff wants to be on boards. I know who wants to be CEO. I know who wants to, I know what they want to do. And for many of them, it means that they're going to leave one day.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And so I think if you're, particularly in today's society, willing to have that conversation of, hey, here's my next, here's where I want to be in 3 to 5 years. Yeah. How can I move towards that here in this company? And, at some point, maybe I should leave, and that's fine too. And so I think if you're transparent about it, if you build up successors, that works well. And I had the same conversation when I was at New Relic. I basically said, hey, I'm looking to get a C-level title in this time frame, and it's okay if it's not going to happen at New Relic. But that just means I'm going to go somewhere else to get it. And I was fortunate. I did have an opportunity to be CIO at New Relic. But by having those conversations early, and I think oftentimes men are more comfortable having those conversations than women. So first and foremost, be upfront about where you want to go, be upfront around what you think it's going to take and validate that with them, and then validate your progress. When you run into situations where you think you're not being fairly judged or assessed, I think it can get really tricky. And some of that is we're not always as great as we think we are
Yeah.
And some of it is we're really not being fairly assessed and given a fair opportunity.
Yeah.
And so in the heat of emotion, it's really challenging to be able to gauge the true reality. And what I would say is having some good, coaches and mentors, sounding boards that you can really test things against, working to have the honest conversation. So to be able to go back, and I've done this because there are women who've wanted promotions, and I said, I think that's great, and I want to fully support you. From where I sit, this is what I believe needs to be true for you to get that promotion. And it's a combination of, your skills, but it's also a combination of business need. And here's where I see your skills relative to that next step. And here's what I see the business need. And if you can take it from being an emotional conversation to a structured conversation, you can identify the outages. And if all your peers are being promoted, and you're not, then you really have some good questions to ask her. And well, it's when I look at so and so who got this promotion, and I look at my skill sets relative to theirs, I think I'm comparable or more advanced. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to have that same opportunity. Right. It really makes people think more factually, because most unconscious bias is emotionally kind of driven out of the back of your brain, versus the rational thinking part. And when you introduce that information, it will cause people to pause.
Definitely.
That's the kind of most tactical stuff I could share.
Yeah, no, it's so great, so valuable. And as you are now, going into a CEO role, and now you're a CEO of Puppet, I am wondering, because you mentioned how, bringing it up and saying where you imagine yourself 3 to 5 years in the company, or what role you see yourself in the company. I'm curious, do you think that's more so like a leader's responsibility to have that conversation, to foster that conversation and be transparent? Or is it, as a incoming, entry level employee, to go up to your manager and be like, look, this is where I see myself? How do you balance that?
Yeah, like I said, for the first 10 plus years of my career out of college, I just kind of sat on the conveyor belt, and I was fortunate I performed well, so I did well. Yeah. It's interesting if I think back to that time, when I think about the folks younger in their career who I coach and mentor, the things that I usually suggest, and that I think are really good practice, is it's great to network. And so when you're first coming into a company, there's so much that you can learn. There's so much that you can do. I really believe you perform your best when you're doing things that you love. Yeah. And people have different passions, different skills. So don't try to go after anything because you think it makes money or somebody else did it. Like, find your own path that nurtures you. But I would say, it is appropriate to ask your manager when you're first starting, like, hey, like, I want to be really thoughtful around my career. And I know I'm just starting here. I'm super excited about this. And at the same time, like, I'm really curious, like, how did you get to where you are?
Right.
And, I would love to, meet some other people who, are more advanced in this field, and maybe do some skip levels with, your manager's boss. There's just informational interviews to figure out what they do. And what I tell the folks, a great target to have early on is, and to maintain over your career is, every week or every month, have a goal of how many new people you want to meet, and how many relationships you want to rekindle. And, some people are natural networkers. I'm not. I did not network very much until I was much later in my career. And it's a huge asset to have. A network is incredibly powerful. And what was interesting is it didn't take much. Like, it took a goal. And so what the goal I set out for myself was do one event, be it a happy hour, a conference, and just meet somebody new and follow up with them and connect with them on LinkedIn, and then go back and maybe connect with somebody who you went to school with, or with a professor or somebody else. And if you think about that, that's, even if you just do one of those once a month, all of a sudden that's 24 people that you're nurturing in your network. And that's where you can learn about a lot of opportunities you never knew existed.
Yeah.
And so that's where you're going to be able to tap into like, wow, that looks like an interesting company, or that looks like an interesting role. So I think early in your career, a lot of it is just information gathering, network building, understanding different, career paths that people have taken. And then when you're later in your career, I think you can start to be much more strategic, because you've kind of, you've gone from a portfolio of options like this, I could do anything,
Right.
to now I've started to develop real expertise. What direction is it pointing? But I talk to everybody on my staff, CFO, CMO, Chief Revenue Officer, and I know I always ask them, 3 to 5 years from now, where do you want to be?
Right.
And I would say it is the responsibility of you to navigate your own career. Don't expect anybody's going to do that. You are a great manager and a leader, and a great friend and peer and mentor to somebody else if you ask that question. Because I'll tell you now, I ask anyone I talk to in the company, I ask them that question, and I'm always surprised the number of people who say, "Wow, nobody's ever asked me that question."
Yeah.
I'm like, how can you have been working for 10 years and nobody's ever asked you what you want to do 3 years from now?
Wow. Wow. That is it's so interesting. So before we wrap up to fun questions, tell me now, your experience as a CEO at Puppet, and then also just how have you developed your leadership style that you're proud of? Or like what do you do to be the best leader, and what metrics do you use to make sure that, okay, I'm the leader I want to be?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to a couple of things. Like my goal at Puppet is to create some of the best years of somebody's career.
Wow.
And I talk to almost everybody who leaves the company, and to thank them for their service, to find out where they're going next, to welcome them to the Puppet alumni community, but to really understand, like, people move jobs. Why do they move? And it's incredibly enriching to me, what they take away from their time at Puppet, from the people here, from the culture, the values. And so first and foremost, I look to myself as a leader, as my job is to create an environment where people can do their best work and have their best and most enriching growth that they can then go take elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's first and foremost. The second is, I really believe that it's important to have purpose in what you do. And so, while infrastructure automation isn't the sexiest thing, as technology runs everything in the world around us, if you can't manage your infrastructure in a scalable, secure way, that creates a lot of problems. So I really believe in what Puppet does, but I also very passionately believe in how we do it. And so I care a lot about diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion. I care a lot about conscious capitalism. And so I look at not just what do we achieve on the top line and what's our exit value and all of that, but how we've done it. Because I think it's time for us to start creating a different way of leading and of running the world around us. And I'd say the final thing is, I take a lot of pride in my team. I can't wait to see what they're all going to go do next. I invest very heavily in both the team building that we do. We spend a lot of time as an executive team building trust and relationship across us, because if we have trust and relationship, that's how we can move markets, we can move teams. You do things for people you trust. It is the most powerful thing that you can cultivate as a leader, is trust. And I invested with them with executive coaches and with career coaching conversations and expanding their network, because at this point in my career, I think the greatest thing that I can do is create that next generation of leaders that can kind of continue on with some of those values and philosophies.
Yeah, amazing. And I will say, I actually talked to one of your employees, and one thing he said about you is that as a leader, you really listen. And like, I think that simple statement is that you listen and you value what your team says and what they aspire to do and what they just everything. I think that's so it's so incredible as a leader, and that's all I could ask for, when I'm a leader, and also for my future boss and manager. So I think that's incredible. So Yvonne, I want to finish off with fun questions, which, by the way, first, thank you so much. It's been so fun, so informative. I'm gonna have to rewatch this and take notes. But tell me first, what is a passion or hobby you have that is completely unrelated to your work?
Well, I was gonna say I'm a huge fan of Bikram yoga.
Oh, okay.
It's I think for me, when you ask like how do you keep that sanity, how do you rejuvenate? Between a combination of Bikram yoga and running, I have a lovely golden doodle, and he and I like to go running in Golden Gate Park,
Love it.
which really for me is not so much about the physical exercise; it's about the emotional and mental release.
Right.
And so those two things hand in hand, I would say, are probably my favorite non-work related passion outside of my family.
And I can imagine that's incredibly important to take that time. You know, as a CEO, it can get, I'm sure it can get crazy. And so taking that almost like meditative state, you know, going on a run and just kind of honing in, I think that's great. My next question, or my last question, is really, what is a weird hidden talent you have? So not really many people know this about you, but you have a hidden talent. But I'm going to go first, all right? So what I do is I throw blueberries into my mouth, okay? So we'll see how this goes.
No pressure. No pressure.
All right. There we go.
That's awesome.
It worked out. Even if you said no pressure, I still got it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I do not throw blueberries into my mouth. Okay. Mine, I don't think I can necessarily demonstrate as beautifully as you demonstrated yours. You know, I would say, you know, finding Waldo. Ever since I was a little kid in the dentist office, like finding the hidden figures, the flying tennis shoes. Yeah. My brain is geared towards seeing things that are harder for other people to see, and my family makes great use of it. Mom, where's the cream cheese? Sometimes it's just opening the door to the refrigerator. Sometimes it requires actually moving something. Yeah. But I will say it's funny. Like I can walk out into the garage and they'd be like, hey, where's the hammer? And literally I can walk into the garage. I'm like, oh, it's right there. And they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just saw it. And so I think I have a good ability to picture something in my head and then identify it in the environment around me, whether it's where's Waldo in the picture or where's the hammer in the garage.
Wow. I love it. I think that's great. Well, Yvonne, I have to say it's been so fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've loved this conversation. I just appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for putting this series together. I think it's great. And I wish you and, you know, all those folks who are coming out of college and in the early stages of the career, enjoy and follow your heart. It's the most important thing. Yeah. Build a good network, and the sky's the limit.
Oh, thank you so much. Love it.
Yeah. Take care.